So everybody, we have a special guest on today. And if you are listening to us for the first time, please subscribe, like, and share on YouTube, on the podcast. If you're listening to us on the radio, we thank you for that. Definitely tell your friends and your family members, but it does mean a lot if you are listening to us on an online platform. Please subscribe, like, and share this interview. So we have Sej Saraiya on here. She is an award-winning photographer, filmmaker. She's from California. We're going to be talking about her and her travel. She's done so many things. It's really going to be a good conversation. So, Sej, thanks so much for your time today. I'm really looking forward to this.
Thank you, Rob. I'm actually very happy and excited to be here and share my stories with you and your audience.
All right. Well, it should be fun. So I did kind of go into a little detail about you to start off, but can you tell the viewers a little bit about yourself from your own words?
Yeah, absolutely. So I am an ethnographic photographer. And so what I do is I travel to the remote places of our planet and photograph and document tribes who have not forgotten the old ways. And so there are a lot of tribes who are very much alive and practicing their traditions, and they have so much culture and so many stories. And this is a culture that's been passed down for generations. It's unwritten. And I document them and I share that with the world because I think that it's so useful in our current world to have this knowledge that these tribes had and continue to have and live in that way.
But what made you get involved in photography, traveling, filmmaking in general?
Yeah, so, well, first of all, I've been a photographer since I was 10 years of age. When my parents gave me a film camera, I started photographing then. And so from a very young age, photography has shaped the way I see the world. My camera used to be and continues to be an excuse and a reason for me to stop for a moment in time and fully engage with my surroundings. So this is something that continues to hold true even today when I travel. And but my search for Indigenous communities actually started as a means of self-exploration. So I was at a lecture by this Canadian ethnographer by the name of Wade Davis, whose work has since been a very big influence in my life. And he talked about the remote cultures living in a way that's alien to most of us in the modern world. But the way he shared, the stories that he shared about them sounded to me more and more familiar to my own way of thinking. And I realized I wanted to spend time with these people and experience this firsthand. And so I gave up my life in Los Angeles and I took off on a years-long journey to meet these cultures and explore their ways of living and being and interacting with the earth. So it was really a means of self-exploration that it started off. But then having spent time with them, the photography was more of a byproduct in that sense. But I have been a photographer since I was 10. And I also went to film school at USC when I was in my early 20s. So it was always sort of a path, but I didn't know that I was going to go on this path. I didn't know that I would end up becoming an ethnographic photographer or a cultural conservation photographer and filmmaker.
So obviously traveling all over the world to these indigenous communities, you don't know them. They speak different languages, different customs. Maybe you do know some of the customs by reading, but you haven't really been involved in those customs. Because you being in the United States for so long. So my question is, how do you make your contacts? How do you go about all this? Because it seems like it could be quite scary because you're putting your trust in a lot of people that you obviously don't know, and they could really scam you and hurt you in general.
This is such a great question, Rob. Thank you for asking me this, because this is the thinking that I went with initially as well. When I first went into the initial tribes that I visited, I didn't even know how to interact with them. I didn't even know if you're supposed to give them money if they ask for it. What do I tell them? What do I not tell them? Because, I had this backpack full of expensive camera gear. So what do I share with them about myself? What's going to happen? My life changed. My whole perspective changed when I started living with them and spending time with them, because we from big cities see the world in a very different way than they do. So in reality, there was this unbelievable sense of oneness with them that I haven't experienced even in the city. I haven't even experienced with my own distant relatives. So the point is, I saw that inherently people are good. And maybe I had 2 or 3 bad experiences, but they were probably on my, my fault that I didn't take enough precautions and stuff, getting stuck in a car in the middle of the night without, anything else because the tire burst. So the reality is that this way of thinking that it's us and them was dissolved for me when I met them, because I saw that there was no us and them. It was really especially I spent a lot of time with Indigenous women, and they took me in, and they protected me, and they guided me. And really everywhere I traveled, and I traveled alone. So one of the advantages of traveling alone was that when we show ourselves, at least when I showed myself as a vulnerable person, coming into their community, they instantly trusted me and gave me an in. Because the thing with Indigenous cultures is mostly the interactions they've had with outsiders were missionaries who came into their world and tried to convert them, and in a way that they did some good, because they did end some of the violent practices or some practices that were antiquated and not needed anymore. Mm-hmm. But most of the people they have seen from the outside have been those that have taken away their culture from them. And so going in by myself was actually an advantage, because they saw that I wasn't there with an agenda to take something away from them, but rather was there to learn from them and interact with them and be with them. And so to answer your question, in short, it wasn't as scary as I had thought it would be when I set out. It was actually a lot more heart-opening and warming. And I found my trust in human beings again.
So we've talked about this, and you did talk about this a little bit in this previous answer that you just finishing off on, about the dangerous situations. But I also want to know if you can just tell the audience about some of those situations that were dangerous that maybe you put yourself into, or they were just there in general, and also those life-altering experiences. I know you did talk about the woman, of these Indigenous women rather, bringing you in, and I'm sure that really shaped a different worldview than you obviously used to. So can you kind of combine those, just, talk about the dangerous situations more in depth, and also how they, really altered your life, these other experiences too?
Yeah, absolutely. So, for example, I went to visit the headhunters. So these are a tribe of people in northeast of India that basically used to hunt heads until like only 50 years ago. And I was on my way to visit them when I met 2 French cinematographers who had just come from there, and they had a very bad experience there. And they were like, don't go there, especially as a woman, don't go there alone, because they're savages. And when people say something like that, I want to go there even more, because I by now I had started to see that there is an inherent goodness in human beings. And so I really wanted to see what these headhunters were all about. And so I went there by myself, and I had a pretty scary experience, but that wasn't with the headhunters at all. Actually, it was in the plains. There was no means for me to get to the mountains, because they had a festival then. They had a spring festival where they honored the earth, and there was no buses, there was nothing, no means of transportation. And I was standing by myself on the road, and I was approached by a bunch of very drunk people. And I would have been attacked. And, I don't know what, I would have been robbed, right? Not sure what would have happened. It was one of the scariest situations in my life, because the roads, everything was completely isolated, and it was just me with my backpack. And somehow, and as always, someone came through, an angel always comes through, and so an angel came through, and I got a ride up to the mountains to the actual headhunters. And So there have been moments like these over and over where I found myself in a situation. Like I remember one time I was in this village in Indonesia and there was no place to stay because a lot of these remote places you can't stay because they don't have the permit to let foreigners live with them, or the government can charge them because they're not hotels per se. And so I had no place to stay. The sun was setting and I didn't know what I was going to do anymore. And this truck full of indigenous tribal women arrived. They were passing through and they just stopped, and the women took me onto the truck and they're like, "You're coming home with us," and they took me home and took care of me. So there, I have been in situations where I'm like, I don't know what I'm going to do, as a woman alone at night, and then something comes up and saves me. So, so that, yeah, there have been quite a few situations. I do want to share though real quick that when I actually finally met the headhunters, they were like teddy bears. They were just the sweetest men who just didn't know better. They did live like savages just because they had to hunt heads of their enemies to protect their women who used to be kidnapped by neighboring tribes. And they're so removed from the rest of us and from the rest of the world, they didn't know. So a lot of them have these ancient practices that they don't know better. But now that they knew it, they were all sharing stories about their headhunting days and laughing and giggling, but they still had felt remorse. So it was there is this beautiful innocence. So that was the answer to some of the dangerous situations I've been in, where I could have been attacked or even worse, whatever. And yeah, but about learning from them, yes, it has definitely changed my view about the world, about the earth, about the nature. So, for example, I was with this Canadian. I was in northern Canada, and I was with this tribe of women who were medicine women, and I asked the woman who she was picking herbs, and I asked her if I could come medicine picking with her in the mountains the next day. And she said to me, she told me where to meet her. She said, "Meet me at the foothill of that mountain and we'll go into the forest and pick herbs tomorrow." And I asked her if we could go in the morning, because she asked me to go in the evening. And I said, "Can we go in the morning? Because I'm flying back to Vancouver in the evening." And she looked at me appalled, like I had said something wrong. And I was like, "I'm sorry." And she was like, "Yes, we can't go in the morning. Morning is when the bears and the wolves go berry picking. The forest is theirs. And when they're done with that, and then in the evening, the forest is ours." That was a very pivotal moment for me, because I have never thought of considering the wildlife animals timings. And, I had never thought of that. And so for, learning about coexisting with bears and wolves and observing firsthand how death is truly a part of life, which I did from a culture in Indonesia, viewing in action agricultural practices without the use of machinery or pesticides among a tribe living so remote in the mountains. It was all very mind expanding. These people have so much wisdom that comes from centuries old traditions that are passed down orally, that my exposure to their ways of thinking really changed the way I looked at the world. It even changed the way I took photographs of the landscapes around me, because among the indigenous, every sound is a voice. Every mountain is a being. Every encounter has a meaning. So what used to simply be majestic mountains or oceans or a beautiful river valley for me turned into teachers of life and precious heritage that is rich with wisdom and stories from our human past.
Really well said. I wish people thought like that. We'd probably have a better world and for sure a better country in general. But unfortunately, that's not how people think here. But anyways, what do you feel like is the hardest part of this job? Because I think personally, my opinion is, and then we can go into yours, is that, traveling and like you said, and meeting all these people that you don't really know if you can fully trust them because, you're a tourist in their country in plain English. What do you feel like is the hardest part of this job?
Yeah, so I think when I started off, that would have been the hardest part, where I'm like very afraid of them. But that's such a past It's the story of the past now. I've learned that they're truly inherently good. People are truly and inherently good. And that's not a concern for me. The hardest parts now are really my own demons. So, for example, I would say one of the biggest challenges I have to face all the time is letting go of control. Because that's one of the hardest parts, because I didn't grow up in a mountain village. I grew up in the city of Mumbai, which is like very fast-paced city of dreams. And then
Yep.
I moved to Los Angeles, also very fast-paced
Yeah.
city of dreams. And you have to plan what's next. You know what's happening in your life. You are this driver of you're the driver of your life. And I go to these indigenous places. There's no transportation to the village I want to go to for days. I have to hitchhike on a truck. And I have to find myself on this truck. And if the truck makes 5 stops, I have to stop 5 times. Or if I go in some local person's car, they want to take me to their village first. And sort of, I have to kind of just like, I have my goal, but I have to let go of it to go with the way it's going, to really go with the flow and understand that I will get there when I get there. That is very frustrating for me. Even today, I haven't learned that. It's like I get to a place, I want to get to it, but it doesn't work like that. So that would be, for me, one of the hardest parts. And the second hard part would be letting go of preconceived notions. Because coming from the West, I have this West, not just the West, actually, I'm from the East, but coming from the modern world, I have this belief that these remote cultures need us, that, oh, they can't be modern like us because they don't know how to. And so I want to go and help them. Sometimes I see certain things and I'm like, oh, that's not how it's done. But that's such an incorrect way of thinking, because reality is they don't really need us. I feel like we need them more than they need us. They are really well set in their lives. And so the second challenge is to just go as an observer, to constantly remind myself, I'm not here to take from them. I'm not here to give them what I perceive they need. I'm here to observe and learn from them. So that's my second big challenge that I constantly have to face on my travels.
Can you go into the picture and the awards behind you? And then I want to go into photography a little deeper after that.
Absolutely. So this is a photograph of a Rai woman from Nepal, which is basically, she's from the Everest region of Nepal. And they're one of the oldest ethno-linguistic groups there. And so, yeah, I took a picture of her because she was in her 80s. And, in the West, like, we are so conscious about the first wrinkle that appears on our skin, especially with women. And when you go to these indigenous cultures, these women, they wear their wrinkles and their sunburned skin with just so much ownership, right? It's not a thing of shame. Because it's for them, it's their wisdom. They don't even put it together like that, but the way they wear it, they wear this with so much pride that I ended up taking a whole series of photographs of these older women in their 80s who were just so powerful and so wise. And so this is a picture of this woman, beautiful, beautiful woman, as you can see. And these are awards for a short film that I made last year with my creative partner. It's a very short film that's played in many, many countries around the world. It's based on silence. And so the whole premise of this film is that we are so afraid of silence and void in the modern world that we constantly need to keep ourselves stimulated. And so this film is sort of, it's a challenge to the viewers. It's a film that makes people cringe in their seats and makes them feel very uncomfortable, and question their own status quo. Because I believe that, so in the East, in the Buddhist tradition, in the Hindu tradition, in the Tao, silence is a part of everyday life. Silence is a very important part of our lives. And I feel like a lot of us have forgotten that. And I think it needs to come back. We need to have that silence back. And so this film won a couple awards, at the film festivals.
I do want to go into the photography aspect. So what makes a good picture in general, in your mind?
Yeah, I mean, so there's the obvious, which is lighting, composition, and timing, of course.
Right.
But I think that there's a more important element to a photo, which could actually transcend all of the above. And I think that is story. especially in the work that I do, I think story would be the most important element, because a photograph has no words. It does not have the luxury of explaining itself. There's no dialogue. It has to speak for itself. And in my mind, in my belief system, art should either raise awareness, or it should raise the human consciousness, or it should switch a perspective. And so, in order to do any of those, and in order to really penetrate human consciousness really deep in a way that people don't get defensive, there must be a story. And so I feel like as long as there's a story, we have a good photograph. But aesthetically speaking, I'm also a big fan of composition. So for me, like, composition is very important, because you also want to enjoy looking at the photograph, you know? So yeah.
Sage, I agree with, you talked about there's no dialogue. So you really have to take that picture that tells the story. It almost goes back into what you were just speaking about with your film, about the silence. So the photo is silent, but you have to look into the photo to try to imagine what is that story behind that photo. Even look at the photo behind you. You study the photo. What is the woman trying to tell me in that photo? What do I feel like you, as taking the picture, is trying to tell me in that photo? I think we need to kind of go deep into that and try to not just, anybody can just flip through a magazine and look at just pictures, but you need to, when you see a photo like that, really kind of dive deep into it and have that silence and try to figure out what the artist is trying to tell you in that photo.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with you. And sometimes just look at it and see what it evokes within you, right? Maybe I'm trying to say something, but it evokes something else within you. And I've had that experience at many of my exhibitions. There's this one photograph that I have, which is a woman who's picking up the cow dung with her bare hands. And she's putting it in this little container, because in most of the villages in the East, cow dung is like this, it's very important part of their lives, because it is fuel. It provides fuel for cooking. It's used to make houses. It's not, they do a lot of things with it. And so she's picking it up with her bare hands, and it's just a photograph of a woman, a buffalo, and the cow dung. And a Belgian woman saw it. The first time she saw it, she started to cry, and she was like, I'm experiencing this non-duality that my guru, her teacher, kept talking about. And she was like, I want to purchase this photograph. And then there was this Italian man who saw it at a gallery in LA, in downtown LA, and he started to cry. And he was like, I don't know why, but this picture takes me back to my childhood, my village in Italy, where I grew up, and I haven't been back for a long time. So I feel like sometimes these photographs that are so disconnected from another person can evoke something very deep within us,
So I want to go toward the end of the interview. Now, you do a lot to give back to the community and people in general. Can you talk about some of these ways where you do give back?
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the things I do is I sell my fine art prints. And the reason I do that is because to have these photos of these remote cultures on the walls of people's homes around the world helps invoke this curiosity about a culture that's completely different from one's own, and start a conversation that could potentially help expand our minds beyond what we already know, and find solutions to environmentally unfeasible lifestyle habits or that we have adopted. So I feel like as long as these stories have not been shared, these indigenous people remain objects of fascination. But then the moment we share their stories, it not only humanizes them, but it also reminds us that there are other ways of living and being and interacting with this earth than the one we're used to. So that's one of the things I do. So I sell my fine art prints, but also when I also donate 10% of the proceeds from all the sales back to these communities. So that's another thing. And then the third one is actually, while I'm on the field, while I'm photographing, I make sure that I take the local kids and sometimes I hand over my camera to them and I let them go out and explore and take pictures. just for them to experience this world, and also for me to see what's interesting for them about their own culture. And sometimes when I need an assistant, so to speak, like to carry something, I take a local kid and I'm like, come with me. So what happens is it opens their world to a different life. And then I show them the photograph on the screen after I've taken it. They really enjoy learning about the process, and it creates this oneness between us. And so there are many different things that I do to give back to the community. But the biggest one is my donation of the proceeds from the sales of fine art prints.
As we end, you've been all over the place. Where are your next trips and when are they going to be?
Well, COVID, of course, stopped me, completely in my tracks, and it was very different. But because of that, I'm actually very inspired to have my next trip here in the United States and Canada, because there's just so much here as well. I live in Topanga, on the land of the Chumash and the Tongva, which is a very fascinating tribe of people as well. So I think my next work is going to be in this country now.
So as we end, what do you hope, Sej, people learn from this interview?
Yeah, so absolutely. So as an ethnographic and cultural conservation photographer, I can say with full conviction that with every dying culture, precious and valuable wisdom is being washed away. Languages and ways of thinking are being forgotten, and unwritten centuries-old knowledge is fading, which is actually very relevant to our current times and our current lives. And the problem that we're fighting, such as climate change, this is only a tip of the iceberg. And I believe that the real problem is in our correlation with the earth. We have forgotten how to relate to it, and we've been exploiting it for monetary profits. But I think that the moment we remember who we are and we start connecting with our planet again, with our earth again, with our mother earth again, things can change. And especially in the West, because see, in the West, we follow an individualistic model of society where we prioritize individual liberty and creativity and self-reliance over societal chains. And this freedom, I think, is very powerful. And a lot of the tribes or Eastern cultures, they don't have this sort of freedom that the West has and the modern world especially has. And there's a lot that can be done with it. And so what if that action and activism, that is the voice of the West, comes together with the self-observation and the awareness of these remote cultures who have not forgotten the old ways, who have not forgotten how to connect to their earth and to their animals. So we need them, and the planet needs them. And so, His Holiness Sri Sri Ravi Shankar says that life is a combination of the individual and the universal. So I think that if we can just be aware of this and come together and have this marriage of these Eastern and ancient, and not just Eastern, even in Venezuela. So I would say the tribal and ancient knowledge, and we can have that married with our Western beliefs and our voice and our action. I think we can make a big difference. We can just learn how to connect with our earth again.
And Sej, where can people find more about you, follow you on social media, whatever it may be?
Yeah, so I mean, I'm everywhere. And so I'm on Instagram, I'm on Facebook, but I think all of this information you can find on my website. So you can even subscribe to my blog on my website. And if you just go to sejsaraiya.com, so SEJSARAIYA.com, all the information is there.
SejSaraiya.com. Sej, thanks so much for your time. It's been a pleasure. And like we said, well, the audience didn't hear it, but we're definitely going to have you on again because there's a lot to talk about with you, whether it's with your works or just in general. So Sej Saraiya, thanks so much.
Thank you, Rob. Thank you for having me here.